Hello and welcome to the Comedian's Paradise. This is the podcast where we speak to mavericks across the comedy world. Now, today's guest has an awesome, presenter name, like Phil Green. I think the name, forget Bradley Walsh and The Chase. I think Phil Green should replace him. Forget who was. I think Phil Green has the name and the personality to replace him. Phil Green. He's a fantastic guest. He's a brilliant comedian. I've had him on many of my shows. He is doing a fantastic work in progress later on this year in Edinburgh. He runs an amazing podcast with the fantastic David Ferguson, a man that I would not want to mess with. So I'm just going to say nice things. But no, Phil Green the podcast is amazing. And it is the podcast that debunks all myths and conspiracies out there. And without further ado, welcome the brilliant, the fantastic, the mesmerizing Phil Green.
Wow, thank you. That's the best introduction I've ever had. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Lovely.
I'll give you a $5 later.
Yeah, please.
So, to anyone that doesn't know about you, tell us a bit about yourself, how you became a comedian, and how you have done what very few people do with podcasts. You've built an amazing, fantastic podcast with David Ferguson, which has hit 100,000 subscribers. Well done.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and it was really lovely. So I've been doing comedy about 8-9 years. I came to it quite late. I've always loved comedy. I loved it when I was a kid. I always watched. So I was a teenager in the '90s, so I watched a lot of sketch comedy, so Vic and Bob and sort of Alan Partridge and Big Train and Fast Show and all that sort of stuff. That was my era, really. And I sort of had a lot of pipe dreams about doing comedy. It would have been sketch comedy at the time. I wouldn't have ever really dreamt of doing stand-up, partly because there wasn't a lot of stand-up on TV then. And then about 8-9 years ago, a friend of mine he'd been on me for years about like doing this comedy course. He wanted to do a stand-up comedy course. And I sort of like said, no, it's not really for me. And then he split up with his girlfriend and he was quite broken about it and he wanted something to do. So he said, would you do this with me? And I was like, okay, fine, I'll do it with you, And so we did that together, and that was at the comedy school in Camden. And it went really well. And then I'm sure you know what these comedy courses are like. You do like 6 weeks, and then at the end of it, there's a showcase, which was at the Backyard Comedy Club in Bethnal Green. And it's a very easy gig because it's like you're doing it to mostly friends and family of the people that have done the course. So it's like it is a full room, but it's a full room with a very warm crowd. But that went really well. And then we did the next gig, and it went okay for me. Obviously, nowhere near as good as the first gig. My friend didn't go so well for him. He then quit after 2 gigs, and I sort of carried on really. So it's weird because I joined to sort of to start doing it really to help out a friend, and then it ended up being the thing that I've carried on doing that he sort of he's bailed on. But I think, to be honest, as soon as I'd done it the first time, I was like, okay, this feels good. This feels right. This feels like something that I really want to do. And I was in a period of my life where I was looking for something and a creative outlet and something new, something different, because I'd sort of realized that the career I was doing was fine. It was fine to as a day job, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. But I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. And I'd done a bit of radio work. I'd done a bit of local radio stuff, presenting and stuff. But and that was fun, but it wasn't quite scratching the itch. So it was only when I got into stand up that I was like, it's almost straight away. I was like, yeah, this feels right. This feels like something I can do, and I want to get good at doing. So yeah, man, it was first few years was good. It's up and down. You have a lot of good gigs, a lot of bad gigs. And when you're on the London scene, you're sort of fighting for stage time, and you only get sort of 5 minutes to start off with. But then sort of towards 2019, I sort of was doing okay with it. I just got to finals of a few competitions, and had a bit of momentum, and I did a split bill show in Edinburgh for the first time in 2019. So, and then I was planning to debut my first Edinburgh in 2020, and then obviously the world fell apart. So I ended up eventually debuting in 2022. And that went well. That show was called 90s Boy, and it got quite a bit of traction. Ended up going to Soho Theatre as well. So yeah, it was really nice to have a sort of successful ish first show. And then I did a show the following year, followed up. I'll be honest with you, probably a little bit too quickly, because the show did well in terms of numbers. Like in fact, if anything, it was better, probably did better in terms of numbers than the previous show. I took it on tour. It did get a bit of recognition, but it wasn't as tight as that first show. And I think that was partly because I had only a year to do it. And whereas the first show you do, you're writing, like, it's everything that you've done in comedy is going into that first show. So like all sort of 3, 4, 5 years is going into sort of that first thing. So inevitably more time and effort have gone into it. So it's sort of second album syndrome with the second one, but there was people enjoyed it. It did go well. And then I sort of, and then I had a year where I was just doing some work in progress stuff. And in that year was when I started the podcast, because, so like you said, David, Ferguson, my friend, he had COVID quite badly. And so to the point where he was hospitalized, and he sort of had, he was in hospital for 6 weeks or something crazy like that. And eventually came out and had to be on oxygen, and he couldn't do stand up for a while because he was not well. So we were then at that time thinking about what could we do creatively that gets him back into doing something creative that's interesting to him, interesting to both of us. And we talked about doing a podcast for a while, but we hadn't really come up with what it would be about. And we didn't want to do just the two of us chatting about nothing. We just wanted to be about something. And but he's always been into conspiracies, and I'm interested in them. He's much more of a believer than I am. Like I don't really believe most conspiracies. There's some I have some doubts. I have some a bit more on the fence on, but what we thought was that was an interesting dynamic, like someone who's a believer, someone who's a cynic. So that's kind of why we started it. And we did a couple of sort of pilots in my kitchen, really, just with the iPhone, and which obviously we would never put out, but it was like to work out what the dynamic would be, what the concept would be. And then and then to the end of 2024, is that right? 2023, 2023, we started put out first episodes. And I mean, like it obviously starts off slowly, like this as a podcaster, you start off very slowly and you have to build the audience. But what we did find is that there's a lot of people that are interested in talking about conspiracy. So even people who are the most cynical are still interested in talking about them, because they're interested in why people would believe this, or why society has got to a place where so many people are buying into some of these conspiracies. So so we actually found that quite a lot of people did want to come and talk about it, which was great. And it's kind of gone from there. So we I wouldn't say we were great when we first started doing it. It was okay, but we've got better, I think, at doing it. And people seem to really enjoy it. But you're right, our YouTube audience has really built quite significantly. So that was really nice. It was really nice to sort of see that growth do well, because you can only control it to a certain extent. You put out what you think is good content, and you try and edit it well, and you try and package it nicely and make it look pretty and all that sort of stuff. But that doesn't mean people are going to listen. So it's nice to kind of build enough of a following that you get that many subscribers. So man, it's been good fun. But as you know, it's a fuck of a lot of work. So and it takes up a lot of time. But also, as long as you're enjoying that, and I think this with anything in life, if something is hard work but you're enjoying doing it and you're enjoying making it, that's fine. People should do stuff for the enjoyment of doing it, and if you can make money from it, that's a bonus. But I think the first and foremost, you have to be enjoying what you're doing. So whether it's podcasting or whether it's stand up or any other kind of creative endeavor, if you're not enjoying it, that will come across in what you're doing. So um, I think that the reason that I enjoy doing the podcast as much as I do enjoy doing stand up is because we get interesting people on. We're talking about something interesting. Some of it's absolutely batshit. In fact, most of it's
Yeah.
batshit.
Yeah.
But that makes it fun, you know. Whereas I think if I was just talking about my life, I don't think my life is interesting enough to talk about. But you know, what we've done 90 odd episodes. So you know, it's more fun to talk about something that's out there in the world that people are believing and find out what other people think about it. So yeah, it's been good, man. It's been good. So yeah, and then like you said, so last year did my third hour in Edinburgh, and we've also done the podcast live as well. Actually, we didn't do that last year, but the year before we did it. We did a run of podcast live shows in Edinburgh for a week, and that went well. That was full most days, which was great. We weren't expecting that. We thought we'd get some people. We didn't think we'd be full every day, which was nice. And we've done live shows at Leicester Comedy Festival and in London as well. So it's been good. It seems to work as a live show, which you know you never know with the podcast whether it's going to work as a live show, but it seems to resonate. And often audiences, they've got an opinion, they want to get involved as well, you know. So it becomes a bit more like question time when we do it as a live show. But yeah, it's fun, man. It's good.
What's it been like when you do the live shows? Do you get any bad shit, people saying some crazy shit like, I believe that farts are the gateway to heaven or something like that? I don't know.
You do get some crazy people. I would say that because if anyone's come along who has listened to the podcast, we get people that have come on that listen, but we also get people that have come along who haven't listened, but they've seen that it's on. They're like, oh, that sounds interesting. And with those people, you don't know how they're going to interact, because with the people that listen to podcasts, they know that it's lighthearted. Generally speaking, it's lighthearted. Okay, it's not that we're not sort of trying to make it funny all the time. We want to talk about things in a bit of depth, but we try to keep it relatively light. But when someone comes along who hasn't listened to the podcast, seen the podcast, you don't know how they're going to take it. But most people seem to get the vibe pretty quickly in the live shows. They get that we want to sort of get to the bottom of it. We want to sort of, you know, but like we're totally underqualified to do it. We have no expertise at all. We're just like finding out the facts of the internet and then seeing what people think. And once people get to that point, they're like, okay, well, even if they believe something different to us, which is fine if they do, we don't mind that. What we never do is we don't try to punch down on conspiracy theories. We don't try, and maybe sometimes we accidentally do, we don't try to kind of make anyone feel stupid, because like people believe things for all sorts of different reasons, and people believe things because they have had a different experience to you or me in life, and therefore they formed an opinion based on circumstances in their own life, and you have to understand that. I don't think it's like necessarily right to just go, well, you believe this, you're an idiot. Actually, the more interesting is, okay, why do you believe that? What is
Yeah, yeah.
that based on? That's the far more interesting discussion than just like you throwing your facts and them throwing their facts, because you're never going to win, and that's not going to produce any kind of interesting conversation. It's far more interesting to go, okay, so why do you believe what you believe? And then, you know, you and I can talk about why I don't believe it. And that I think is a much more interesting conversation. And so the audience like to get involved in that. So they will sort of say why, you know, they believe something or don't believe something. And we like that. We enjoy that. You know, it's nice to see, we want people to be engaged with it. And I mean, from a technical perspective, it's a challenge because you can't mic up everyone in the audience, but you know, they've always been fun. Every live show we've done has been fun. So that's a nice aspect of it. So hopefully we'll try and do a few more of those this year.
If you did it like a Piers Morgan style, I think it would be a lot more dangerous, and you probably need security guards.
Yeah, probably. Unfortunately, neither David or I are cunty enough to do that. So it would be a real twist if we did start doing that.
If we it'd be lively and you'd be everywhere. Oh my! Well, I mean, but I mean, bloody hell, it'd be a completely different show, wouldn't it? If you
Totally
guys
different
did
show.
that?
And I'll be honest, like it's not the vibe we're going for. And it's like, you know, he's a contrarian. He's intentionally a contrarian, right? And I don't know whether he believes everything he says, but he's, you know, he's prodding people and he's poking in order to get a reaction. That's not what we do. We want to know what someone thinks and we want to know their opinion. But equally we don't, but if someone has a different opinion to us, we don't, you know, we don't sort of laugh at them or go in on them. We want to know why they got that opinion. So, you know, even David, like, yes, David and I joke, you know, he jokes about me about being a sheep and I joke with him about, you know, being a fucking moron, but but at the same time, we respect each other's opinion. I listen to what he has to say. I listen to why he believes what he believes, and similar with the guest and anyone else. Like, you know, we have an audience member come in who has a specific belief on a certain topic because they've seen something or experienced something. You have to listen to that and you have to understand, you know, where they're coming from with that, rather than just sort of like single them out. And also it's not really a great thing for the room to sort of single one person out and have them as, you know, to paint them as an idiot in front of the rest of the crowd. That's not really what we want to do. So yeah, I think it'd be a real twist if we went down the Piers Morgan style route. And also, I can guarantee you, we have a lot less guests wanted to come on if we started to go down that route as well.
Definitely. It's yeah. It, but it's I've seen the Yuriko Katani episode, and I mean the most interesting thing for me about doing the podcast is always the guest and finding out their story, but then hear what they say. I'm guessing it must be the same for you and Dave because you got some amazing people in there, and I've seen them myself. But one of the things that I found interesting about running a podcast, and we said this before, once the podcast starts growing, it's easy to guess. I did find that at the start, I would have to send maybe 50 emails or messages before I got one exception. And it's gone up through the years. Now, I'll probably be around 50 and I'll get 3 or 4.
Yeah, I think when people see, I think people have to, you've got to understand, for a lot of people, most people don't go on podcasts all the time. Right? Don't get me wrong, there are some that do. There's lots of comics that do loads of podcasts, but there's some that don't. So they kind of need to see what they're coming into and what it's about. And that's one of the reasons why we try to make it an atmosphere or an environment that people feel comfortable in, that they can sort of voice their opinions, they can joke with us, they're prepared to be a bit critical, they can react however they want to, and we don't judge them for the way that they react to that. And I think, but you can only do that once you've built an established, once you've established what the podcast is going to be. And then when people see that, they can go, okay, well, that seems like a nice environment to go into. So I think, it gets easier to book people, but also like you know this, you want, just because somebody is a comedian doesn't mean they're right for the podcast, right? And that doesn't mean that we don't think that there's lots of people that are brilliant people, but it's got to be somebody who we think is going to work in that dynamic and we think will have an interesting opinion on it. And we don't care what someone's opinion is. Like, we don't care whether they believe or don't believe. We don't even mind what they pick, whatever conspiracy they pick particularly. What we think about is like, what will the dynamic work for the podcast? And I think we've been pretty good with that. We've sort of generally had, like you said, with Yuriko, you know, I mean, I knew Yuriko a little bit, and thought she's going to be a great guest, and she was a great guest, you know, and that's the case with all the guests we've had on. And some we know well, some we don't know well, but it doesn't really matter. Like, we sort of treat them with the same level of respect, and they seem to enjoy coming on, and that's kind of what you want from a podcast. Because if people, you know this, if people are enjoying themselves on the podcast, listeners will stay to the end of that episode, right? If you hear someone who's like kind of not really checked into that fully, then people aren't going to listen. You want guests that are engaging, who are excited about the topic that you're talking about, whatever the podcast is, whatever it's about. And the best podcasts, I think, do that. They bring in guests who are energetic or excited about being on the podcast and are interested in talking about whatever that podcast subject is about, you know.
Is that like the guideline you have for guests? Because for me, each guest I get on has something that I find interesting or something that I've not heard of, or I think brings a different angle to each episode. And I try and change it each month. Like some months I'll make it more maybe about the tech or different styles of comedy. Other times, different countries. I want to vary it to keep
Yeah.
me interested. Do you
Yeah.
do something similar, or
No,
what's
we
your process?
basically mostly on availability. So yeah, a bit. Yeah, it is that really. We look at what is that person's style, what they like as a sort of conversationalist, um, and what would they bring to the pod, and then we sort of think about that really, and whether they would work in that dynamic, and we've pretty much been good at getting that right, I would say. There's a few people that we didn't know well before we brought them on, but they've been recommended to us by like our producer and sorry, our tech, and so we've gone, okay, we'll give that, and then we've listened to their podcast or had their content and thought, yeah, that feels like they would be good on this, and that's always worked out, you know. So that's good, but so I think it's just about working out what works for the individual podcast, and just because, you know, someone would be good on another podcast doesn't mean they'd be good on ours, and vice versa. So, you know, like you said, what we're doing here is it's a different sort of different subject matter, um but you know, I think that with every podcast, the sort of more that you think about the dynamic and what works and who's suitable for it, and then the better the quality of the product in the end.
It's a bit like an Edinburgh Fringe show. So it's nothing like it, but in terms of like, there's so many people in the actual Fringe itself. If you make it too generic, you're not attracting anyone unless you're a big name. But you got to, mistake I made when I've done shows is I didn't target it to a specific way. I just thought what would be a nice title. Yeah,
Mm.
you got to do that, but you got to say what you do and attract be more niched in terms of who you attract.
Yeah, niche, but also, like exactly as you said, clear in what it is that um, what you are selling, if you like. So with my Edinburgh shows, I go quite literal with titles. Like they have, so the title and the poster do sort of tell the audience what this is about. And because, you know, most people don't know who I am, so therefore, if you think about it, you got to Edinburgh as a punter, you've got thousands and thousands of shows, and you're comparing, you know, this unknown person and against me also as an unknown person, but this unknown person hasn't really told you in their poster or their description of their title what this show's about, and I have. If they go, well, I know what that's about, and it may be that that doesn't appear, in which case they won't come, which is fine. But they go, well, I know what it's about, and I'll go in there. And if you set the expectation right, then and they come along and you're giving them what they expect that show to be, they're rarely going to be disappointed. I mean, that doesn't mean they're always going to love it, but generally speaking, they're more likely to get what they came for if you have marketed it in the right way, right? I mean, with the podcast, I mean, to be honest, we didn't really think through the title that well. We called it Believe, and I think it's not a bad title. The issue is that there are so many other podcasts called Believe, so it's the one thing that if we went back, we probably would change it. But fuck it, we are where we are now. But we call it Believe the Myths and Conspiracies Pod to make it a bit more specific, so people know what they're getting coming in, and when they look at the artwork, it's sort of fairly clear that, you know, it's about the unexplained, it's about myths and mysteries and that sort of stuff. And when we were billing it in Edinburgh or anywhere else we've been, we've sort of used that artwork, and we in the explanation told them what this is. So and as a result of that, when people come to live shows, they get what they're expecting. They get people talking about conspiracies and myths in a light-hearted way, and we so far never seem to have anyone not enjoy those shows. So I think it is about setting that expectation for the audience. You're absolutely right. So you can think of the coolest name in the world, but the coolest name in the world doesn't mean it's the best name. It just means it's a cool name. But what we think is a cool name as artists isn't necessarily what the audience will go for. It's about finding something. It's about marketing whatever show you're doing in a way that appeals to the demographic that you're trying to attract. And I think if you give it a title that is ambiguous or misleading, people will come along, and some people will enjoy it, but some people just won't. They won't. It won't be what they expected, and therefore they'll end up disappointed, right? So yeah, so I'm a big believer in sort of like telling the audience what it is they're getting. I think you tend to get the audience that you want, largely, not entirely, but largely by doing it that way.
So you, one thing that I've noticed is that you do a lot of like you do a lot of like shows across the country in terms of festivals and the podcast, and you do the circuit quite a lot as well. But would you say that you're a comic that does a lot of festivals? Are you more interested in the doing the hour shows and building your own crowd?
Yeah, I probably enjoy that more than clubs. I do enjoy doing clubs, and I like doing that. It's a different thing, really, because with a club, it's like it's nice to walk into an environment where you haven't had to do any of the marketing. It's just the club sells tickets. You walk in, you do 20 minutes. Um, they pay you ideally, and then and that's it. So I have a honed club set that I do, and I vary it slightly depending on the type of crowd or where we are, where I'm going in the country. But I prefer to, yeah, I like doing hour shows, like you said. Quite like comedy festivals as well. I like the because with that, someone has chosen to come and see you and what you're doing. And again, this is why the sort of marketing of the show is so important, because as long as you're sort of being fairly clear about what the show is about and what they're going to get, then it doesn't mean you're getting full rooms all the time. Of course, sometimes you know what it's like. Sometimes you're only performing to 10 people, but if those 10 people have bought into this and gone, well, I don't know who that guy is, but I quite like the sound of that thing he's going to talk about in this show, so I'll go along. As long as you're talking about that thing, they're going to be okay. Well, that's kind of what I came along for. And um, so yeah, I find that the audiences are more sort of emotionally invested in sort of festival shows, but if it's a a solo show, because they have ideally looked at the poster, read the blurb, or at least a bit of the blurb, and they've sort of bought into this and therefore happy to pay the money. So yeah, I enjoy both, but yeah, you're right. I think I've probably enjoyed crafting my own shows a bit more, and you've just got a bit more creative freedom as well. Like I can't go into a club on a Saturday night and do new material, right? I mean, I could do it on a Monday night, but a Saturday night, you've got to give them the gold, and you can't do some like you can't also have. It depends on the club, but you can't necessarily do anything too deep or too sort of like cerebral, too thinky, because people are. If you like, where was I last week? Bath. Um, Lovely club, right? Lovely club, but it's stag do's, hen do's, is that kind of vibe, and y- so you've got to give them stuff that's that they want, that's going to keep the energy of the room up, and also there's a promoter to keep happy, and so I can't do like a 10-minute long story that's with multiple layers. Whereas I could do that in some other places on different night, but it just depends on the audience. But with your own show, then it's always what you want. It's always what you want it to be. Because it's and you can afford to do longer bits, and you can afford to have silences and pauses a bit more. So yeah, for what I enjoy doing and what I enjoy writing, I think the uh, do creating my own shows is probably where I find the most fun in comedy.
Okay. And do does doing a lot of your own shows and podcasting, have they helped each other? Have they helped you learn how to be better in both areas?
Yeah, probably. I think, yeah, there's some overlap. I mean, one thing, just purely from a technical perspective, and you'll know this, I'm sure, but when you're editing, like I didn't know loads about editing before I started doing a podcast. I had to learn all that stuff from YouTube videos and that sort of stuff. But so I've got quite good at learning how to make reels, and that helps in for the sort of stand-up comedy, or promote it, or making content for my own comedy channel, not the podcast channel. Um, so from a technical perspective, like, you can't just be a stand-up these days. You have to be good at, you have to be a producer and an editor, and a content creator as well, in order to sort of build your audience online. So those skills that I've learned from doing the podcast have paid off in terms of, or yeah, to a certain extent have paid off, in terms of being able to create content for my social media channels. But also I think when you do your podcast and you listen to yourself and watch yourself back all the time, because you're editing your own podcast, you pick up on the traits about you that you don't like. So like, those little things that you might say or do, or mannerisms and stuff, you're like, oh fuck, I do that a lot. And it's only when you start watching yourself, you realize that you do those things. So it kind of helps in the sense that, um, I'm then more conscious of the fact that I do that thing. So when I'm on stage, I'm like, I'm sort of in my head going, don't make that noise, or don't repeat that, or don't and too much, and that kind of stuff, So yeah, I think they do sort of, help each other a little bit. I mean, they are different, but there are definitely some areas where there's overlap. So yeah, I think it has made me a better stand up. And actually doing stand up, I think has in itself also probably made us, Dave and I, quite good at podcasting, because we understand what the dynamic needs to be. We understand the need to kind of create an environment that is good for the guests, but is also the listeners and the audience that are listening engage with. So yeah, I think that there are overlaps there for sure.
Now, you've I messaged Al Lubella a while ago to come on the podcast, and he said a very straightforward thing, and he said, "Wow, you have a podcast," which is sarcastically saying everyone has a podcast.
Yeah,
And for anyone that's like, if 10 years old or 15 years old and saying like, oh, I want to build a successful podcast, you are someone that has built a successful podcast. And I can hear myself verb. Sorry about that. Let's try this. What about now?
yeah, you're good. Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. What would be the things that they need to look out for? Because I know that a lot of comedians want to be famous, want to be big, but you got to deal with a lot of trolls and people that hate you. And for running a successful podcast, maybe you have a lot of mad stuff going on, like weird messages, weird criticism, people following you. I don't know.
We get not as much as you might think, actually, but we do get people, if they've got an opinion on it, it's usually to do with the conspiracy itself, right? So it's sometimes we get a bit of flack, that's personal, but actually not that much. It tends to be much more about the subject that we're talking about, and people have very strong opinions for or against, the conspiracy. Some people like to pick us up when we're wrong. We had one guy on one episode, like, literally break the episode down by timestamp and tell us why in these particular timestamps the thing that we said was wrong, correcting us on that. Which, to be honest, I didn't take that offensively. I was like, well, you know what? He's so dedicated to listening to this episode that he's actually bothered to kind of like fact check us on certain things. It's fine, that's all right. So yeah, we get a bit of that. We definitely get people who are like, yeah, but have you, and we sort of come to a conclusion. They go, yeah, but have you looked into it from this perspective? And then we also get people who sort of say, oh, have you thought about covering this or covering this? So that's most of the messages that we get. It's not, it doesn't tend to be particularly aggressive. It tends to be, us personally, it tends to be much more to do with the actual subject of that particular episode of the podcast than anything else. So I don't really mind it particularly, but I'm sure, if you're getting, and I think this is probably more likely when you're doing putting stand up clips online, if you're getting sort of, a lot of hate. it's very personal in that respect, then that's a different thing, and it's a different, that's not a very nice thing to have to deal with. But that's unfortunately part of what it is now. Like, if you're going to put content out there, you then have no control over who sees it, and there's always going to be trolls. There's always going to be those people out there. I tend to not rise to it too much. I mean, the content I create for TikTok, I do a lot of sort of political and sort of pop culture and sort of current based reels for that, and that gets a lot of debate in the comments, like especially the ones that do well, like people just commenting on people, then people arguing with each other in the comment section. And I never really get involved. I just let them sit. I just sit back and let them do that, because to be honest, if they're doing that, they're driving the algorithm. So it's great for me. It's like, it's free marketing. So I just let them argue it out amongst themselves. But yeah, there's a lot of that. So I think you do have to be a bit prepared for that. But yeah, I mean, if you are starting out doing a podcast, I do think, I mean, it's hard. I don't consider myself an expert, because we've only done one part. I've only created one podcast, but from the limited experience that we've had with that, I think what I can only say what's worked for us, and what has worked for us, what is it being about something specific, marketing it as that, having, we think, a relatively professional feel in terms of the sound and the video quality, and getting on good guests and getting on good people, and obviously making sure the edit is quite good as well. So I think those are the things that that have sort of helped make it successful, or relatively successful up until this point. But also, like, it is easy to start a podcast. I think that's a good thing. I don't think that that's a bad thing at all. Like, just try it out, just do it. Like, it's not going to be perfect to start off with. Ours definitely was not perfect to start off with. It took us quite a while to sort of get into the rhythm of it. Like, I don't think it was bad to start off with, but it's definitely a lot better now. And that's just because you get used to doing it. You get used to the dynamic and the environment, and once you're more comfortable with it, you learn what you're doing more. So I just think, start it, do it. If you got a good idea, fucking crack on, stick it out, get it out there, see if people like it, and then you can build from there. Most people would not expect a podcast to be fucking banging on day one. But if they like the subject matter and they like the thing that you're talking about and they're interested in the concept, they will stay with you for a while. Obviously, if it never gets better, then they might drop off. But if they see that podcast growing and improving, they'll stay with you. It's. I mean, I'm sure you listen to people's podcasts. I'm sure you subscribe to some podcasts, and you'll do that, I imagine, partly because you like the content of the podcast, but also partly because you like the people in that podcast. You like the personalities of those podcasts.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like the theme of it.
Like the theme of it, yeah, exactly. So I think with any, if for anyone who's thinking about doing a podcast, my only real suggestion would be, listen, in the podcast that you listen to and you like, what is it you like about them? Why do you like them? And what do they do well that makes you listen? And take those qualities and try to bring that to your podcast, right? It doesn't have to be about the same thing. In fact, ideally, it wouldn't be about the same thing, it'd be about something different. But those qualities, if you can bring that into what you're doing, then people will listen for the same reason that you listen to their podcast, if you see what I mean. So that's how I would sort of, that would be my sort of, if it can be a helpful tip, that would be my helpful tip to anyone.
And for anyone, what's like the ugly side of podcasts in terms of the work that needs to go in and the nonsense you have to deal with. So for me, I'm glad that it's just me doing it. I find that if I get more than I would prefer a podcast with, I think 3 people on a podcast is probably ideal. I think, but sometimes when it's just one person and another person, it gets a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that I don't like about it, the only thing I don't like about podcasting is the admin side of getting guests. Everything else, perfect.
Yeah, the admin side is a challenge. I mean, we don't get too many people. It's now that we've built up a bit of a name, we don't get too many people who say no if we ask them to come on. But the challenge is getting, particularly if it's a busy person who does a lot of TV or radio stuff or whatever, and is a gigging comic as well. Like, and also, you know, we have people who have kids and a lot of commitments, and so it's working around their lifestyle. Also, because we record in a studio, we've got to get them to the studio as well. So it's all of those things that have to be considered. But you know, we sort of try to be as flexible as possible, that side of it is challenging, but it's not too bad. I think that this sort of the most time consuming bit of it is not the recorded podcast. It is all of the editing and the promo and the reels, and that part of it. That's sort of what takes up most of the time. Um, so, you know, even putting the notes together, like we do the research beforehand. That doesn't take too long, probably an hour or so. Do we put that together for each episode? But editing it and getting it right and getting it sounding good and snappy and figuring out what the reels are that we're going to use to promote it, that takes the time. So there is a lot of that goes into it. But I mean, as you know from doing your own podcast, you get better at doing that over time, and you get better at both doing the podcast and at editing the podcast. So I'm quite comfortable with doing it now, but ultimately I'd love to have a producer do it all for me. I'd love to be one of those podcasters that charges the studio, talks into a mic for an hour, fucks off, and then someone else deals with everything else. That'd be lovely. But unfortunately we're not there yet. So maybe one day.
But one thing I did hear, and this is from Tom Little, say if it's complete bullshit or not, and rip me apart. But Tom Little, I mean, he's done quite well on social media. He's got a good following, but he said that out of all of the things to build a following, he says a podcast is probably the most important. Do you agree with that sentiment? Because it's a bigger investment.
Uh, yeah, I agree that it's a lot of investment, and that if you're going to invest the time, it's got to be worthwhile investing the time, and you so you've got to. I think with everything, you kind of think about, why are you doing this? Okay, why are we doing it right now? With the podcast, we wanted to build a podcast. We wanted to build something people come to. Ideally, what we want is people who listen to the podcast to come to obviously our podcast live shows, but ideally also our solo shows, right? You know, our stand-up shows. And I think there's a bit of an overlap there. Some people do come off the back of it, but not massive amounts of people. And I think that's probably because what I do as a stand-up on stage, I don't, you know, is very different to the podcast content. Like in terms of me as a person, then yes, it's the same person. But I don't talk about conspiracies as part of my stand-up show. Really, occasionally I might dabble in it, but not loads. So there's not a huge overlap there. Whereas if you are doing a comedy podcast, which is much more about along the lines of the stuff you would talk about on stage, then probably that podcast is going to drive people to your solo shows a lot more. And that's probably a part of it that I didn't really think about much when I started the podcast. That doesn't mean I don't enjoy doing it, and I'm not going to stop doing the podcast for that reason. But I think you have to understand what it is you're doing it for. And if you're doing it just because you enjoy doing podcasting and you want to build an audience and it could become a revenue stream, and you want to do live shows with that podcast, that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're doing it to bring people to your solo shows, then you have to think about, is the content similar to what I'm doing in those shows? And if it isn't, am I doing the right thing? So yeah, I do sort of agree that you I don't know whether it's the most important thing that a comedian could do, but I do think that it can work very well for bringing people to live shows
Okay.
of either your podcast, or it can bring people to your own stand-up shows. But it depends on how much overlap there is between the podcast and what you do on stage.
Okay.
That would be my analysis of it.
Okay, yeah, of course. it's got to fit in with what you do. What would you say from doing the podcast, from doing the club circuit as well, and doing the show, have been the magical moments that have taught you the most? So for the podcast, I've had a lot of great guests. I mean, the what was the thing that I really Dane Baptiste was a great guest. He's been through a bit of a story, and I like through talking to him personally. I like him a lot. You can only sometimes judge someone from when you meet them face to face or when you're with them.
Yeah.
People can say different things, but yeah, he was like this year. Dane Baptiste and Susan Nixon have probably been my two favorite things. It was very different. Dane Baptiste, he was talking about how sometimes with comedy, people use it as a way to find identity. And sometimes with the cliques that go on in comedy, they weren't the popular kids in high school. So they sometimes use that as a way to do people that are similar themselves. And it's a terrible thing that comedians do or other people do in all sorts of cliques because they're validating what was done to them in the past.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I do agree that some people do comedy. Well, I'd say most comics do comedy because everybody did school. I think that's pretty. There's and not exclusively, but it's pretty common that and I didn't. I mean, I didn't love school. I definitely wasn't a cool kid in school. Equally, I wasn't sort of, a little bit of bullying, but not loads. So it's sort of I was very middle of the middle, really. But but I never really enjoyed school particularly. And I think that is pretty common with a lot of comics. There are definitely exceptions to that. But yeah, of course, like you're doing there's a psychological thing there where I think people do comedy because they want to be all of the things that they might have been bullied for in school. They want to be the person to say it, and they want to be the person to say it first, and they want to be the person to say it in a funny way. So you're so no one can kind of come back at you anymore as an adult. You're laying bare all of your failures and your your personal experiences in life. And if you're doing that with yourself in an entertaining and funny way, no one can make it funnier than you can, really. So I do see it from that perspective. But equally, like I came to comedy late. I was in my sort of mid to late 30s when I came to it, and that is late, as you know, these days to start. Um, and I had already sort of gone through a bit of a mental health crisis and sort of and I was looking for something creative and looking for something that was right for me, and eventually found comedy, and that ended up being the right thing. But I think that if I had started it in my 20s, I probably would have seen it as, oh, this is the thing that will sort me out. This is the thing that will be like, this will be the daily therapy that I need. And I think that is not right. I think that is a sort of a deluded perspective. And I'm not criticizing anyone that thinks that and goes into it, because if I'd started in my 20s, I would definitely have been one of those people who believed that. So, and that's in no way saying they shouldn't do comedy. Absolutely, if you enjoy it and you're good at it, and you absolutely should crack on and do it. But it isn't in itself. It isn't everything, and you do still need to deal with your issues, not just through comedy. So, I know it's a common thing. People joke, well, comedy is comedians do comedy because it's cheaper than therapy, and there is some truth in that, but it isn't therapy. It is therapeutic to talk about it, but it isn't in itself therapy. So I do think that uh, it's an easy trap to fall into. But yeah, uh, but it's very common. It's very common. That said, I do think as long as you're enjoying doing comedy, you should keep doing it. I don't think that and we're all damaged. We've all got some baggage. We all bring that with us. That's what forms a comedian. That's what makes a comedian. But also, I think you have to also have time that is not just you making jokes out of it, is also you helping to deal with it and processing stuff. So does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. You're basically saying Yeah, it does make sense some ways, because logically, why would you want to go up on stage and make a fool out of yourself? But the thing is, as well, yeah, I definitely think I didn't used to think that a lot of comedians who had issues, but now I think there is something missing for why a lot of comedians get into it. I definitely think that.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, I think anyone who wants to should do it. I firmly believe that. And I think it's a great thing, and I love doing it, and I love spending time with other comedians. I love being in clubs. I love being in green rooms. I love being at festivals. I love the world of comedy, and you're, you know, this is the reason why I like having comedian guests on the podcast, because there's a certain wavelength that you're all kind of on. You know, like all comedians kind of operate on a similar way, like you sort of get each other. And that allows the, like you said, with the three guests, with the, you know, three people scenario, it means that the pace of it generally stays at a particular level. And that's great. And you know, when you have someone who isn't a comic on, it's not always necessarily going to be able to stay at that pace, because the mind, the sort of the brains aren't quite wired in the same way as a comedian. So that's kind of why we do get a lot of comedians on. Not to say that it exclusively needs to be. There's lots of great people who aren't comedians who can absolutely keep that sort of pace up, and it's great. But yeah, I mean, I do enjoy spending time with all sorts of comedians, and but yeah, everyone's got a different story. Like everyone, you know, that's the other thing. Like I don't, I don't know whether you've ever met two comedians that you ask them how they started and they've got the same story, because most people haven't. They might have done a course, but how they got to that point is going to be because something happened, because something in their life happened, because they were experiencing something, because they were dealing with something, whether it's grief, whether it is redundancy, whether it's a separation, whether it's whatever, something has brought them to that, you know?
Uh, I agree, and comedian has been very interesting, and that's one of the reasons why I've been able to run the podcast. And you've yourself have been able to run the podcast with as many episodes as we both have, because comedians are very interesting people. You name it, I agree that you name it, they're probably doing comedy. Whatever you can think of, whatever background you can think of, whatever kind of person or whatever, they probably do comedy. There is the thing that's very interesting about comedy. It brings people from all walks of life, some that you can never think of. I mean, I got a former Crip gang member on the podcast, a former human trafficker. You wouldn't necessarily think that that would be a stand up, but they're brilliant, and they had a
Those
brilliant
years
story.
behind me. I told you about that. I told you not to bring that up.
Sorry, man.
Yeah, but that's like what a fascinating backstory to hear. Like that, like, and why, and what brought that person to comedy. You know, that's such an interesting story to find out. Like, I always do know with any comic, like you sort of delve into that, and also you know what comics like. They're very honest. They're very open people, because you have to be to do this. So, you know, it's and like there's, I remember, I think it was it might have been Jimmy Carr, but I remember a comic saying, you know, there's no small talk when it comes to uh, green rooms, and there isn't. Like you sit in a club green room and you've never met a comic before. Rarely are you talking about mortgages or interest rates, or like you go straight into like really fucking personal stuff, because it's comics don't really do small talk. They just straight into like, what's the interesting thing here? Where's the story? And that's what they want to know. And I think that's why often comics connect quite well, because it's very open. They're very open about their lives, and so it makes for really interesting discussions, very interesting topics, and that's what connects people, right? So yeah, it's one of the parts of comedy I enjoy the most.
Yeah. It is, and the thing is also the people that come and watch comedy is also very interesting. I think Siobhan Dodd maybe have told you, but we had a very mad audience member come to one of our heckle shows. He was called Rich and Big Rich, and the guy was an old guy with a walking stick, and he just, oh, it was mad. He came in like middle of the start of the show, and then Siobhan says, "Hello, how are you doing? You can sit down. Where'd you like to sit?" And then straight away he points to some guy's lap and said, "I'd like to sit there." And then I got a big laugh. And then he was a mad nutter, because he was heckling people, and we gave him too much attention, and his ego got too big.
Yeah.
Andy's that put him down a bit, and then he just shut up and got quiet and was really offended by it. And then after the break, Andy's up tried to calm down a bit, no hard feelings. The guy starts swearing at him. Then Andy says something back. Then he gets up, and we had to get in between him. And then we they're about to have a go, but we stopped it.
Yeah.
And then Siobhan, I don't know what she did. She did some magical spells, some Patronus on him. And she said something, says, "Oh, thank you for coming here, but after everything, yeah, you got to go." But she said it in such a nice way that he left. But that's the thing with comedy as well. It's mad. You don't know. It can be mad in a... Yeah, sometimes it can be dangerous. I mean, some comedians have been attacked. There's a funny video of Gubemi the Deeper being threatened by a big 6-foot guy. But yeah, there's all sorts of crazy things that go and happen. And it's a mad but fun... It's like a roller coaster comedy. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And the people that come to watch the shows are interesting, and comedians are bloody interesting.
Yeah, but you can sort of see why those incidents happen. I mean, they're rare. Like, you know, for someone actually attacking somebody physically is very rare. Heckling, as you know, I mean, obviously you were in that was the heckle show that you did, which is a different thing. But like on a general level, it's not as common as most people think. Heckling, like it does happen. But usually the reason it's happening, either someone is blind drunk and just wants like the attention for themselves, or they've got an opinion on the thing that the comedian is talking about on stage, right? I think American audiences, I've done a bit of gigging in the US, and American audiences are much more like vocal with their opinion on things, and like so, they like you'll say something and like they'll out loud say, "I agree with that," as they're clapping. And it's like they're really, and I think that's what that is. And it might be that they're disagreeing with something you say, and maybe they're vehemently disagreeing with something that you say. And often that, but you're still that's still connecting with an audience, right? So whatever you've said is something that an audience has connected to, has definitely been listening to, otherwise they wouldn't have reacted. So it's the sort of power of what that person on stage is saying, and they're obviously saying it in a way that engages the crowd. Obviously there are edgelords who are deliberately saying, you know, risky stuff and stuff that sort of goes close to the line or over the line in order to go to reaction, and that is fine as long as you know what reaction you're going to get from the audience, and you can deal with that reaction as long as you can do fine. But yeah, that's part of it, and you never know what's going to happen. So I mean, like, you do when you're on stage, you don't necessarily need an audience to agree with everything that you think, but what you want them to be is interested in what you're saying. So if you're talking about something personal, a personal story, and you've got a particular opinion on something, whether it's to do with society or politics or whatever, the audience doesn't necessarily have to agree with that perspective, but they have to. But what you want to is understand why you have that perspective, right? And obviously, you want to make that funny, and people engage with that, even if they don't agree with your point of view. They engage with you being honest, I think.
Okay, but what would you say how does an act like Stephen Catling or a clown act like Vigo Venn do the same thing?
Do you know, I know because I direct Stephen's shows, so I know how he deals with it, and he's very good actually at being able to he talks to them. Actually, he kind of like, I wouldn't say comes out character necessarily, but he sort of like, he talks to them and then they makes a quick remark, and then sometimes we'll get them involved in the physical thing that he's doing on stage, and that often tends to bring people on side with it. But yeah, I mean, but if you go and see someone like that, if you go and see, look, if you take a punt and you don't know that it is, and I'm not going to call Stephen clown comic because he's not purely that. He's lots of different things. I think he's sort of
I'd say so too.
Genre defining in that respect, and that's why I love him, because he's unique in that respect. But there isn't. There are going to be people that go to those shows who are taking a punt, and some of them are going to absolutely love it, and some of them are not, because it's just not their type of thing. That's fine. But the point is that as an act, you build up to have an audience and a following of people who will come and see what you do because they love what you do, right? It's a bit like some people don't like one-liner comics, so they probably aren't going to go and buy a ticket to see Jimmy Carr or Milton Jones because it's just not their bag. Some people don't like storyteller comics, so they're not going to pay money to come and see me or some a similar type of comic, and that's fine. We all have our different tastes. But I don't think, like, if somebody doesn't enjoy what you do, you can't be offended by that, really. It's just they don't enjoy what you do, but at least they've taken a punt, they've taken a chance on you, and that's a nice thing. But ideally, what you want is people to come along and enough of a percentage of that audience enjoyed what you do to then come again and see you next time.
Okay. But what would you say is the difference between like how does an alternative comedian connect with the audience, and how does like a stand-up, how are they different?
Well, because I don't. It's different in terms of like what you're physically doing on stage, but it's not really different necessarily in terms of the topics engaging with the audience. So, to take Stephen as an example, he does a lot of stuff about being an autistic comedian, right? And whether you are autistic or not, if you have something that has made you feel like an outsider your whole life, that sketch or that character will resonate with you for that reason. Also, if you're doing stuff, if he's doing a character that's like had a big breakup or had an emotional thing with the partner, whatever, people that have been through that, which is, let's face it, a lot of people, will still resonate that. So even if he's dressed as a fucking snail, crying about something, that people, even though it's silly, people they're connecting with it because what's underlying that is actually a real life issue that people can connect to and identify with. And they like being able to laugh at that. They like being able to see that represented in some sort of obscure, surreal way. And that's what makes that comedy engaging. So, it's not, you don't need to be saying it, just because you're talking about something that connects with audiences, it doesn't need to be as literal as here's my experience of it. As in, I would be, because I'm a storyteller comic, so I would tell the story, but a clown comic or a more surreal comic will do the similar thing just in a very different way, and that's fine.
Okay. And to anyone that's sort of listening in right now, what would be your advice on connecting with the audience?
I think that being as close to yourself as possible on stage is quite key. I know that sounds weird, me saying that when I've just said, talk about Stephen Catlin dressed as a snail, but in a way that's still very representative of who he is as a person, as a performer, and his mindset. And I think that the more that comes across in what you do, the better you're going to be doing it. You're going to enjoy the performance side of it. Your passion for the performance is going to come out. And the more that you do that, the more that people will connect with it. I mean, the first show that I did, my daily show, was a lot of fun, and it was very nostalgic, and it was about the 90s, and it was about 90s, but it wasn't really about 90s, if that makes sense. But it was, and there was some personal stuff in there, but not loads. And definitely in the subsequent shows, there's been a lot. I've talked a lot more about sort of personal stuff, and it's never like, I never make it too much of like a sob story show, but it's sort of like, it's joking about issues and things that happen in life that I've experienced, but in a light-hearted way. But people connect with that because, particularly people who have been through something similar or know someone that's been through something similar, people connect with that stuff. So I think the more you do that, the more authentic you can be and true to yourself, the more likely that you're going to connect with an audience, and the more likely they are to come back because they like you. It's not just they found it funny; they like you as a person. They like who you are, and they like the things that you talk about, and they find it interesting. And that's I think this is really key to it.
Okay. And for anyone that is listening in right now, what would you say the main thing that someone should prepare for if they want to start a podcast and be a comedian? The one thing they got to be prepared for, like the biggest bullshit that they got to prepare for.
They need time. They need fucking time, man. You need to balance your time. That's the thing. The only thing, well, I can only say from my experience, but having spoken to a lot of podcasters, I'm sure this is the same for you. Also, because you're not just a comic and a podcaster, you run gigs as well, right? Which is another level of admin on top of that, you know, so I think if you're going to do those things, you need to make sure that you've got the time to do everything well, right? But otherwise, I think if we do too many things, um, it's hard to do all of those things well because you're stretching yourself too thin. So I absolutely think, like, if you want to do a podcast, do a podcast. I think people who want to do a podcast should go and do a podcast. If they want to try stand up, they should try stand up. I think those are great things, but make sure that you have the energy and the time to put into it, because if it's something you want to do, you need to dedicate that time to it and have the energy for it. Otherwise, it's why are you doing it, you know? Yeah, but I think generally speaking, if people enjoy something, they will find the time to do it. That will be that'll be my main thing. It's just finding a time, balance your time. And there are times where I will turn down gigs to spend time, making editing the podcast to and making sure that the episode we're putting out is as good as it can be, is as well done as it can be. But equally, we do have breaks in between seasons of the podcast, and I need that time to write, and I need that time to sort of work on my own show, because otherwise, if we're doing a podcast episode every single week, that takes up a lot of hours of that week. Not the actual recording, but all the other stuff that we've already talked about. So sometimes you need time out to go, okay, I need to dedicate some time to writing this new show, you know? So I think it's not just having time, but it's balancing your time between things and making sure that you're giving your all to everything that you're doing, and don't do too many things that mean that you're doing certain things a bit half-heartedly or without as much passion as you could be because you're tired or because you're too thinly stretched. That would be my personal advice.
And how do you make the decision on the things to focus on?
Well, I don't think you have to necessarily pick and choose. You just have to balance the time, right? So, um, like I said, like I'm this year I'm doing a work in progress, right? I'm not doing a full hour in Edinburgh because I know that I won't have the time to create a show that I'm personally going to be happy with. Saying this is a full hour, it's ready to go to all that sort of stuff. So I just want to develop something this year. Um, and if I was whereas I could go, yeah, I'll do a month in Edinburgh and it'd be a full stretch now and put all the time and money, the money behind it. But at the moment, I feel like I don't have enough time, and I want to come to the end of this podcast season. I want to then start thinking about the next one and plan for that properly. I want to have some time in the middle to write a show, but I want to do that as a work in progress this year. So it's those sort of decisions. It's basically not just doing something for the sake of doing it. It's doing it, having the time to do it well, and giving yourself the time to do it well and time and space to do it well. I think otherwise you put too much pressure on yourself and it's unnecessary. We don't need to do any of this stuff. We choose to do this stuff. So if we're going to choose to do it because you enjoy doing it, you've got to give your all to it. You got to, you want to make it as good as you possibly can.
And when you're doing this process, do you make a decision to do one thing, like 1 month, one thing to do this month or something like that? Or what's your thing?
Yeah, a little bit, but it's more. So I look at it and think, okay, how many festivals am I doing this month, or how many club gigs am I doing this month? What am I building towards? So, right now we're sort of early part of the year, right? There's not. Well, I've just done Leicester Comedy Festival, right? Then I'm not doing a festival until end of March. I've got sort of 6 weeks in between that, right? So, um, so I've got club gigs in the diary, but it's not purely club gigs, because in club gigs I can't work on new material, um, which I need to do for the next thing, the next version of this work in progress, right? So I want to be building on what I've already written. I want to improve that material. I want to write new material for the next version of this show. If I'm doing club gigs all the time, I can't be doing too much new material in those. I mean, there are some where you can do a bit of it, but you can't. I can't go on, on a Saturday night on a 20-minute club open a spot and do 10 minutes of new material, because they're paying me, and they can't, if it's shit, they're not going to bring me back. So therefore I have to do stuff that I know works in that environment. So therefore I will still do some club gigs, but I'll also have at least half the diary will be new material nights, so that I've got those nights and that go to take the new stuff, try it out on stage, know whether it works, decide whether to keep it, decide whether to bin it. And then eventually, when it comes to that next work in progress show, I've built up a sort of bank of material that I want to then try as part of an hour-long show. So it's those sort of decisions, really. Whereas, if I wasn't, if I was a club comic, you'd still do that, because you'd still need to work on your material, but you're doing it to do in a club, so it's a different thing. So it's just figuring out what it is you want to do, and making sure that you manage your time to be able to deliver the result you want from that. So if what you want to do is an Edinburgh show, you need to make sure that you have the time to build the material, and you have those spaces, like some of your nights, like where you let people try out new stuff, right? But there'll be some nights where you might not want to, because it might be, let's say it's a charity gig, and you want people to bring their best stuff, right? So you've got people have to manage their diary. Comics have to manage their diaries, I think, depending on what they want that to be, what their next goal is.
Okay. And what would you say? Do you follow the rule of three when you're prioritizing? Do you use the Eisenhower method? Do 3 things right now, do 3 things later, 3 things I don't need?
Not quite, but I probably do subconsciously, actually. I don't really think about it in those terms, but yeah, probably that kind of is. I think having more than 3 major things on the go at the same time it makes it very difficult to manage. But that doesn't mean you can't do more things. It just means you can't necessarily do them at that particular point. So, but therefore, if you're giving yourself space in, let's say, 3 months' time to do that, to try that out, it's great. Do that. Like, I've gone through periods doing improv, right? And when I've been doing that, I've then sort of like pulled away from other things in life, but I've intentionally said, okay, I'm going to park that for a while. I'm going to do this, work on this, and see how much I enjoy that, and the experience of that. But I can't do this well if I'm also got these other things going on in the background. So it's just, again, it's just time management and not overstretching. And I think the best comics do that well. That's from what I've seen, that I think the people that really produce really good content, really good material, really good shows, really good solo shows, or whatever type of shows they're doing, do that well. They dedicate the time to doing that, and they sort of put aside other things while they're working on that process, and maybe they will then go try something different afterwards, which is fine, but it's just giving yourself the time.
Okay. Who is an example of someone that demonstrates that well, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh man. I mean, in terms of like big name comics, uh, I think, I mean, I was listening to Romesh Ranganathan talking about this the other day, and he is now doing his own podcast, and he's everywhere. Like, he does like loads of TV, does like loads of, he does his own podcast, he does, he's got radio show, all this sort of stuff, right? But he will say, and I remember going to see him do a work in progress, sorry, not work in progress, but sort of, he was developing material for a stand-up show, and this was last year, and he said, look, this isn't going to be ready for this year. I'm going to tour this next year, because I've got this project and this project and this project on the go. And I think that is a good example of understanding and managing expectations, because, like, obviously I'm sure his agency would love him to go on tour, because he'll sell out every room he goes to, right? But if he's not going to be happy with the show that he's producing, then he should give himself a year and a half, 2 years to produce it, because he's got all these other things on the go, because he's got his podcast, and because he's got his radio show, and because he's doing TV shows or whatever. So I think the reason that he is where he is, in my opinion, I don't know him personally, but is because of that. And I think the best comics do that.
And he used to be in League of Their Own as well.
And he used to be League of Their Own, exactly, right? So, you've got to pick what you're doing well, and we've all seen stand-up shows that we're like, that comics done. We're like, oh, that wasn't as good as it could as I've seen him that person do before. But then we also see people who consistently deliver like great hour shows, but they don't try and knock one out every single year. If they've got loads of other stuff on, they maybe do one every 2 or 3 years or whatever, right? And or if they do it every year, then they pull away from other things to dedicate time to that, and therefore they consistently produce good hours. So I think it's just that, man.
For anyone that's listening in right now and they're like, Phil, he's the G, he's the man. Where do they find out about you?
Where they find out about me, they could go to philgreencomedy.com, or they can look at Phil Green Comedy on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook. I'm on X, but I don't really use it. So any of those really. Yeah. Or just come to a show. I'll literally tell you everything about me in the show. So come to a show.
Guys, you know where Phil is. Hope you follow him. Hope you go and watch him on The Chase. So,
You and your Sesame got on The Chase. I mean, do you know what though? I'd love to go on The Chase. That would be a personal ambition for Phil.
no, I think you would be good from what I've seen of you in terms of hosting the way. I think I could imagine you doing quite well presenting a show.
Okay, I was thinking of going on as a contestant, but okay.
Okay, fair enough.
I'll take out. Is it Bradley Walsh that presents The Chase? I'll try and take it out, and then maybe that'll put me in with a chance.
But yeah, you know where he is. The next guest that we got on is Michael Coutamache, who is he's a physical comedian with mime. I saw him in some sort of mime workshop lately, and I'm interviewing in about a couple of hours from Phil. And we got John Townsend, who is a lot of people in the stand-up world don't know him, and a lot of people in the Gaudier world don't know him, but he is quite a famous clown known for his physical comedy. So yeah, and I'm gonna do this one last thing. That's their next episodes. Phil, would you have any questions that you'd like to ask them?
I'd like to ask them. Oh wow, man, that's a difficult one. I'd love to ask a mime how they rehearse, how they practice. I'd love to know that stuff, because I don't have enough insight into that world to know how they prepare to do like what they do. Yeah, that would be my question.
Okay, well, guys, you know about Phil. You know about our next guest. I think the next guest is going to get on will probably be more sitcom related and more sort of into the industry. I mean, I had Susan Nixon on before Phil from 2 Pints, and she's
awesome, man.
But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the episode.